Hello, hello. Oh, sorry. Didn't know how sensitive the mic was. Um, Hello, good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming to the Story Intelligence presentation. Today, we're going to talk about how we can unravel creativity with data. Basically, demystify what works, what doesn't work, and how we can quantify something as subjective as writing, as subjective as any creative or artistic pursuit is really, and how we can find and identify the patterns of like what works, what doesn't work, and how we can apply that to our stories to make them better. Right. So I'm just going to tell you guys something up front. I am going to begin this presentation wrong. The way I start this presentation should not be how you begin any of your books. Now, I know that might sound a little strange, but by the end of this presentation, hopefully, assuming I don't botch it completely, you should all be able to kind of recognize what exactly it was that I did wrong, and maybe even tell me what I could have done instead. So, yeah, let's get right into it. My name is Nico Altamirano, and I am here with Inkitt. And at Inkitt, we are building the Disney of the 21st century. Now, what the heck does that mean? I mean, when you hear Disney, the first, like, you immediately know who we're talking about. Like, Disney is this media giant. Probably a dozen different movies or stories come to mind of your favorite films, the classics, right? You instantly know its quality. So one, there's the instant name recognition, worldwide a household name, and two, synonymous with quality of great stories. Where the 21st century bit of it comes in is how we are the most data-driven company in the world of entertainment, and we are creating blockbusters at scale. Now, I know there were a lot of buzzwords in that sentence, but essentially what it comes down to is our data-driven talent discovery process and how we then bring those incredible stories into other platforms and formats like ebooks, audiobooks, print, translations, video, TV, and film, merchandise, games, and yes, even theme parks. The Disney of the 21st century, Inkitt Land is very important to our vision in the future. But how does it all work? So as kind of a broad strokes overview, it starts with what we call our systematic bestseller creation process, and that begins with our data-driven talent discovery. So using our free community platform, Inkitt, authors upload their books where they can start gathering a community of readers from all around the world, build that following that they deserve. And from there, that is when we begin to collect data on your stories. We can tell how much readers engage with them, how much they love your stories, and from there, we offer a publishing contract to our sister app, Galatea. And Galatea is where we monetize the stories, where we go through the whole story intelligence process, which I'll get to in a bit, and where we begin to expand in all those other formats and platforms I mentioned previously. So getting right into it, what is story intelligence? It's basically the method that the in-house team of writers that we use at Galatea to improve your stories. So at Galatea, we collect all sorts of data on your books, from the minutia of like chapter by chapter engagement, even down to like paragraph by paragraph or line by line. So we can tell which aspects of your book readers love, which parts of your book they maybe don't like so much, and then either through our in-house writers or if the authors want to be more involved, through custom tailored story intelligence guidance. You then make changes and edits to your book, and those are launched as an A/B test, which is something we have an advantage over more traditional methods of publishing, because once your book is on the shelf, it's hard to really retcon or change anything. But we launch them as an A/B test. We compare the two against each other, and the version that the readers love more, the one that performs better, that makes more revenue, goes on to be kind of like the new baseline. It's kind of like a cyclical process. So far we've launched over 3,000 of these, and each winning test has an average improvement to your story by 165%. So over doubling the potential revenue that your book can earn. Right. I very briefly want to share a success story of one of our dear friends and one of the most successful authors on our app, Sumia. She is the author of The Arrangement, which is one of the most popular stories on Galatea. And she first published her story to Inkitt on March of 2017. Now, Sumiya's from a town in India named Odisha, where just over half of the women know how to read and write. But fortunately, she found Inkitt, she posted her story, and we discovered through our algorithm that the readers absolutely loved it. So we signed her to Galatea. We produced a bunch of additional sequels, a bunch of different formats, and went through the story intelligence process. And we increased the average revenue that she earned from her books by over 600%. So now Sumiya has fans all over the world, and she's accrued over 70 million reads across all of her books. So really, our mission is to discover these hidden talents and turn them into globally successful authors. And you can kind of tell that the publishing process that we have is a little different from the traditional method, where we remove the personal bias of the editors, and it's much more quantifiable. Like we've all heard the stories of J.K. Rowling and Stephen King, how dozens of professionals kind of passed on their book. And it wasn't until one of them kind of took a chance, like, you know what, maybe these authors are all right. Right? So for us, we really want to avoid having your stories get lost in the slush pile and help them find the audience that they deserve. So how is it that we can make sure that you don't remain a hidden talent, right? And the one thing we have to really understand first is like the attention economy and how instant gratification works today. Like I'm sure some of you have heard of these terms before, but basically everything nowadays is competing for your attention, from our smartphones to the myriad of social media platforms that are out there. Everything nowadays is very easy, passive, and quick. It's almost brainless. Like, has anyone ever just found themselves doom scrolling in their bed on their phone, like on any social media app? Anyone? Just me? All right. But yeah, like comparatively though, with reading, it's much more active. It requires a lot more effort. And while any author will die on the hill telling you that reading a novel or a book is much more fulfilling and a much more gratifying experience, it's hard to like turn down funny cat videos, right? So being authors, how can we compete in such a world of like flashing lights and catchy jingles where everyone wants to get your attention? Well, we do that through data. Now, I promise the rest of the slide isn't going to be all graphs. But basically, like, I just want to highlight a very simple point here. So just to break this down for you really quickly, the x-axis, the bottom there, is each dot represents a winning story intelligence test, right? And the bottom there is the chapters changed in the test. So if change was between episodes 1 and 10, there'll be a little dot at the 10 mark. The y-axis up there shows the CLTV improvement, which basically is customer lifetime value. But what that essentially means is how much money the book earns, right? So kind of just taking a quick glance at this, what I want you all to notice is the concentration of dots at the bottom left corner. So we can see that a majority of our winning tests occur at the beginning of the book. And if you kind of see this general trend from the top left to the bottom right, the upper limit of improvement that a change can have is much higher near the beginning. And just so you all know, that little dot at the very top left is not a glitch, it's not a typo. There is a way through the strategies that we're going to share with you today to improve your story by almost 1,500%, 15 times the revenue that you could potentially earn with your book. So how can we use this to our advantage? And basically, it's just following the path of least resistance. Like we're all very efficient. If left to our own devices, we usually take what is easiest, and basically the beginnings of our books is where we have the most eyes of all of our stories. So of course that begins with a cover or the title of your book, and then maybe once that's gotten their attention, they leaf through the first few pages in a bookstore, or they press the sample button on the Amazon webpage. And this is where they decide to either this book interests them, they're going to purchase it, or maybe they decide it's not quite for them. So real quick, 2 different covers here. This is The Weight of the Dark, one of our thriller novels on the book. Show of hands, who thinks the cover on the left, the red one, does better? All right. Now show of hands, the other one. Interesting. Cool. So we can see that actually it's the one on the right. We can see that 21% more readers started reading, and more interestingly, 28% more readers finished chapter 1. Right? So not only does the cover help attract the reader's attention and get them to pick it up, but depending on how it correlates the actual content of the book, it actually also encourages them to read a little more. Let's do another example. This one, much more subtle. It's just the location of the title and the color of the font. So hands up, who thinks the one on the left did better, the orange? Okay, how about the one on the right? It is the one on the left. The one on the left did better. Much more subtle change this time, but a staggering 41% more people started reading, and 38% more readers finished chapter 1. So these are just a few examples of all of the cover and title tests that we do over at Galatea. Like, all of them are analyzed to understand the different impact of the different cover elements of story performance, and they are all very specific to genre as well. So just in the interest of time, we have dozens of these, but I'll share a few examples with you all here. Like, for science fiction and fantasy, black as a background, we found, actually has a negative impact on cover performance, whereas black as a color border for horror and thriller actually improves cover performance. Romance and erotica, left-aligned titles, and red as a primary color has a positive impact. Whereas for paranormal romance, having the specific niche represented on the cover will help. So if you have a vampire romance, it makes sense to have vampires on the cover. We'll go through a few more examples, this time with title testing. So Jewel in the Crown versus the Traitor Princess. Who thinks Jewel in the Crown did better? Okay, and Traitor Princess? All right. The Traitor Princess performed better. In this case, the learning is the titles are too abstract. Like Jewel in the Crown, it is an interesting title, but we can't immediately tell what the story is about like we can with the Traitor Princess. And next one, Mending a Shattered Heart versus Heartbreak Recovery. Mending a Shattered Heart? Okay, Heartbreak Recovery. Okay. This one, Heartbreak Recovery, actually does better. 30% more readers started reading. And generally, if a title is too long, it'll perform a little not as well as the titles that are shorter. And this kind of falls back to the attention economy. You know, readers really want to get things to the point really fast, and if something doesn't immediately catch their attention, they're more likely to move on. So there are infinite ways to begin a story, you know, and having a compelling intro will multiply the success of your book. And fun fact, about 15 to 30% of your readers will stop reading by the 8th sentence of your book if it doesn't captivate them right away. So I mean, like, where do we start, right? What to do and what not to do. The following are going to be a few real-life examples of story intelligence tests that we've done. And we're just going to share a few archetypes or a few categories of tests that you guys can apply to your stories to make them better. So the first technique is a flash forward. So basically, this first example that I'm showing you is the original story before we made story intelligence tests. And I know the text might be a little hard to read, but basically, the story opens on our main character, Lauren, and she's getting ready for an interview. And she's nervous about it because this CEO has a reputation of being this ruthless, enigmatic, terrifying billionaire. This is a billionaire romance, in case it wasn't obvious. And in this scene, in the opening scene of the book, she's getting ready for the interview and speaking with her roommate, right? And it kind of hints at her motivation of she wants to pay for her father's expensive medical bills, and that's why she's going to this interview. This next slide shows the story intelligence changes that we made, kind of showcasing the flash forward. So here we've completely removed that scene of her getting ready for the interview, and we open on a flash forward a little bit later on in the story that shows a pivotal scene between the two main characters, Lauren and Mason. Basically, she gets a mysterious call in the middle of the night to meet him in his hotel room, and she is offered a deal that she cannot refuse. So essentially, this gives us a glimpse of the relationship between the two leads, and it immediately hooks our attention. Rather than just getting ready for an interview, she is suddenly in this high stakes situation where she has to meet her terrifying boss in a hotel room, right? So kind of takeaways here. It's good that we immediately opened on an interesting high tension situation. It presents the dynamic between our two main leads, and it emphasizes the high stakes and emotions, specifically between character relationships. What the original could have improved on is that we should not focus on story setup. And it's bogged down with supporting character interactions. Of course, while her best friend is an important supporting character, it's not where we want to introduce our readers to right at the beginning. And of course, we don't want the first image we have our main character to be too mundane. Like everyone wakes up in the morning, everyone gets ready for work. That's not really what readers want to read about. They want to see like what is interesting about the story and why should I continue reading. And just from like that scene change, that scene adjustment, it improved the story's performance by 49%. So almost 1.5 times the revenue you can earn just from that quick chapter 1 change. Another example here is something you can do with cliffhangers. Now, once you've kind of adjusted the very opening of your story, cliffhangers are a surefire way to get your reader to want to read more. So in this scene, it's from a scene from one of the novels in our app called Yes, Mr. Knight. And our main character, Jamie, she's trying a Christmas-themed dress for an upcoming Christmas party at her work. She's there with her friend. She's trying it in the change room, and she's like, oh, I don't know if this is really for me. Like, it's a little bit too revealing, and it's not really my style. Where the cliffhanger of this original chapter ends is where she sees the main male lead, Mr. Knight, outside of the shop, and they kind of lock eyes through the store window. And essentially what the cliff is trying to do is to build tension for the upcoming Christmas party. It's like, oh no, he's seen me in this dress. What's he gonna think? I don't want him to think I'm wearing it just for him, yada, yada. But the chapter ends with them making that high tension, like making eye contact, and then he leaves. And then basically, it is just resolved, right? It's building anticipation for the next chapter. This is the story intelligence adjusted version, and it's exactly the same setup. She is trying on the dress with her friend, but instead of meeting and locking eyes with Mr. Knight from outside of the shop through the window, he is right outside of her changing room. She is in the store, and they immediately have that more visceral face-to-face contact of, oh shit, what's gonna happen now, right? So basically, it is much more active, and more importantly, it doesn't immediately solve the answer of the cliff. Like for example, with this one, they see each other, and then, oh no, what's gonna happen at the Christmas party, and then he leaves. The question is resolved. In this example, they come face to face. It's a much more visceral reaction with our main character, and then immediately, okay, what happens next, right? So here are kind of like the takeaways overall of that example. The new cliffhanger is much more active. It presents a tense situation that is not immediately resolved, and the cliffhanger revolves around the core of the story, which is the relationship between the two main characters. Like I mentioned before, the other one is a much more passive chapter ending, and the new situation is immediately resolved. And just from this tweak, there's a 127% increase in revenue. So going back to this graph, last graph, I promise, I just want to bring your attention again to that test in the top left, the nearly 1,500% increase. And this next one is a story intelligence test written by one of our authors with story intelligence guidance, the tailored information we gave him based on data of suggestions of what he can do to improve his story performance. So this is from a story called Bait. And basically, as we see here, the story opens with our main character, Amber, kind of setting the scene. Right, so the first line, working at Taylor's Books wasn't a bad way to spend the summer. The drive was a bit far, but the people were nice. The hours weren't bad, and it was more money than not working. She then goes into speaking about her boyfriend, Frankie, how they spent a lot of time together, how he is like kind of a big deal in their small town, and she goes into like her life plans. And then it's not until probably halfway through this little sample snippet here where she introduces Bastian, this mysterious and incredibly attractive stranger, right? This is the end of that chapter, still the original before the story intelligence changes. And this is showing like a point of view switch with Bastian. And essentially the cliffhanger of this chapter describes how he's interested in Amber and how he wants to get to know her better. A little mysterious, a little ambiguous, and it kind of gets you interested on maybe what is going to happen next. So this is the story intelligence adjusted one. And immediately the first line, I thought I had the perfect life, but then I met Bastian. So immediately the story opens on Bastian and how he changes everything from the very first line. You can also see here that their first meeting is told through active dialogue and an active scene rather than the kind of the exposition that we see in the previous. And along with that, there is also the new cliffhanger adjustment for Bastian. And there are other few minor changes, but the main difference I want to point to is just that very last line. I'd be back tomorrow, and I knew she would be there waiting for me. Compare that to this one. It wasn't that I was a stranger to women, far from it, but she was different. I had to know why, and I'd never forgive myself if I screwed up. The majority of the changes of these two really is just that first and that last line, right? The rest of the content is basically identical, but just from those two tweaks, we saw nearly a 15 times increase in the performance and the revenue of the book. So kind of as some takeaways for you all here, like that immediacy of the opening, very first line, and we instantly know what the story is about. The interaction between the two main characters is told as it happens in the moment rather than through exposition. And it focuses much more on the emotions of our main character and how she reacts in real time to the situation rather than a retelling of events that happened. No, the new cliffhanger promises active action, and it foreshadows more about the nature of their coming relationship. Right? So essentially a bunch of learnings here that kind of distills all of the changes that happened in the previous. So here is a little bit of a cheat sheet. If there is only one slide you all take away from today, it would be this one. You know, first, the beginnings of your stories is the most important. Yes, that even means more important than the ending. The emotional connection to characters is more important than plot setup. You know, as we've seen with, for example, the Mason test. She's setting up, she's getting ready for the interview. She establishes her motivations with her sick father, why she's going to interview at this place. Whereas the winning test was just right immediately, right smack dab in the middle of things. Immediacy and active action is what hooks readers and compels them to continue writing. The more interesting your opening is, the more active it is, the more likely they'll continue to read. We do not want our stories to begin in the mundane. We don't want them to show how our character is just like everyone else for that first opening scene. And of course, you want to give a glimpse of the core of your story as quickly as possible. So basically, think of it as almost an elevator pitch, the first couple of paragraphs. A reader opens your book, they read the first few lines, and they should know what your book is about. What we don't want to do is focus too much on detail, description, or exposition. While of course, like all of these details are important, and while readers are going to need it as they continue to read through your book, it's not what we want to open with. All of your amazing world building ideas and all of the intricate relationships between characters becomes much more compelling once your readers have a character that they can attach themselves to. It is the context of that exposition to your characters is what makes it special. Focusing on plot over characters is also something that we want to avoid, kind of just similar to the mentioned reason above. It's much more engaging if someone you're attached to, for example, if your character is in a gunfight, your readers are gonna be much more engaged and invested in the well-being if they know who the character is. And again, opening on domestic situations is not a good introduction for your character. It's not what will get readers to latch themselves on and to continue to commit to your book. Right, so essentially all of this is to say we want to empower you with data. We want to be able to have you make informed creative decisions with some verifiable learnings that we've been proven to work. And ultimately, throughout these various examples that I gave you all, you know your characters and your story the best. If it's absolutely integral that your character must start the book with them brushing their teeth, then you can do that if that is what you really want. Just try to find a way to make it more interesting. Try to apply these wider learnings to your novels, because it is up to you to kind of take these learnings and apply them creatively to your own works. So yeah, if any of this interests you, we have our Inkitt's author subscription program. This is essentially a platform where you can profit directly from your work, from your readers. We take no fees. It's built especially for authors. There's a built-in e-reader and things like that. And Inkitt has a proven publication path and a track record of turning people into globally successful authors. Also, if you wanted to experiment with any of these yourself, the Inkitt platform also has the capability to run your own cover A/B tests. You can get access to reader data, and soon, I think later on this month or next, we'll have summary or blurb testing as well, along with title testing and SI content changes coming soon. So here's kind of like an example of one of the screens. So you can see there through multiple books, you can set up 2 different covers, and then they will show you like the statistics of which ones perform better and which ones don't. But yeah, these are some social media links if you wanted to give us a follow. We're also going to have an informal meetup to chat with myself or any of these 3 lovely folks in the second row here. But yeah, we have some time for questions if anyone has any.
Don't get old. It's a 0 out of 10 experience. Anyway, so do you have statistics on the difference in performance between like first person and third person?
Yeah, first person and third person. Actually, for all the different tests we've run, it doesn't really make too much of a difference in terms of performance, in terms of like different revenue. What we have found is depending on the type of story that you want to tell, it can help with retention rate, with readers like continuing on to the end of the story. So we found that generally first person works more for like romance, contemporary romance, or like romantic stories. And third person works more for like science fiction, fantasy, things like that. It is a generality. It's not like a hard and fast rule, but as a general trend, that's what we've discovered.
Morning and thank you.
Yeah.
My question is more this. I write mainly nonfiction and historical fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any way I'd fit into any of this? Because I'm fascinated.
Yeah, right now on Galatea, a majority of our stories are fiction, though nonfiction is, I believe we have some nonfiction stories on Inkitt. Yeah, so there is definitely a space for you on the Inkitt platform for sure.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Good morning. My question is, your platform being that it's on its own thing, how do you make sure that the data that you're collecting isn't just based on the sample group only being people who would go to your website versus people who would regularly browse just the Amazon store for their Kindle, so that you know that you're actually being able to apply the same lessons to other platforms?
No, that is a fantastic question. Thank you. So there is going to be a large chunk of our readers that find us organically through Inkitt. Though Galatea is much larger, and we run a lot of like advertising campaigns for like the wider romance market or any of our fiction markets. And we also get a lot of organic installs from people that like are outside the community. So the data that we collect is as is as wide as possible to make sure that like we're not kind of pigeonholing us into like just a very specific niche. Okay, great. Well, thank you all very much for coming, and we'll be around if anyone wants to chat.